Welcome back, everyone, to a days late episode of last week's movies with me, Zane Simon. I keep promising to improve. I was gonna try to do a theme song thing intro this time, maybe try to like come up from the bottom or something, or slide in from the side. But I don't know. The song didn't work, so I gotta figure something out to make this a little prettier and fancier. But in the meantime, thanks for sticking with me. As those of you who've already seen a couple episodes know, and for those of you who are watching this for the first time, this is my personal video log and diary of my quest to build a collection of 1,000 movies that I love and can watch all the time. And in doing that, I try to make sure I watch like 4 to 6 movies every single week. And when but after I watch them, usually I end up with like a couple that I think are good and I'm going to add and try to watch, make sure I watch again soon. And then if I watch them again and I still really enjoy them, then I add them to my collection. And that's how I build my massive movie collection, part of which you can see there. Anyway, this week I watched, last week I should say, this week I'm watching other stuff, but last week I watched The Death of Stalin, 13 Assassins, The Offence, People Will Talk, and The Furies. Starting out, Death of Stalin by Armando Iannucci, who created The Thick of It and People Will Talk and Veep. Death of Stalin is by far my favorite thing I've seen of his. I enjoyed Veep a lot. Thick of It and In the Loop are both good, but they came off as they felt a little too cynical for me, and Death of Stalin is certainly cynical. But and I'll try to explain this as best I can because it's a little twisty logic, but it works for me as a movie that I absolutely love, and that's that. Even as something that's very historically rooted in fact and very clearly throughout the movie rooted in fact and in horrible things happening and the cynical way that the political world works, being about a famous event in history, and especially in another country, but just in history in general, something in the past, something rooted in the past and rooted in a specific time and a place and people. Death of Stalin feels very much more removed from real life for me, even as a movie that's factually based, whereas something like The Thick of It or In the Loop, even as satire of modern politics that's just not rooted at all in any real current event, but it's just rooted in it's just a sort of gloss of modern political life. It reflects much more heavily on my sense of reality and my sense of the world, where it's just like, oh, I watched something like In the Loop and I'm just like, oh, that's really how it works, isn't it? That is honestly, this is a window into our modern political world, and that makes me sad. Death of Stalin, it's like, oh, that's how it was. Even if it's goofy and weird and funny, like, I can feel like that's how it used to be. That's how it was in the past, and that little bit of remove really cuts the cynicism for me into something that's more enjoyable, even as it's still it's very much a grim movie. It's more grim than any of his other projects, I would say, or his other projects that I've seen. I should say more precisely, but beautifully filmed. I love the acting. I mean, Jeffrey Tambor obviously is not to be celebrated at the moment, but he's still good in this. He's still interesting to watch, and along with Steve Buscemi and Michael Palin and Simon Russell Beale is just amazing in this. Somebody who I really don't think I'd ever picked out in anything particular. He's only been in 38 movies, and don't know that there's any of them that I've seen at all. Or I've seen Orlando, which was he was in 1992 movie Orlando, but I wouldn't remember him in that and couldn't pick him out of it. He's amazing in this. And it's just there's a thing some people I've heard from back from like, oh, I can't stand the way that everybody's just speaking in their own accents. English people are speaking in British accents, Americans are speaking in American accents, Russians are speaking in Russian accents. There's no sense of play towards like a fake Russian accent or anything like that. But I actually would really prefer that. I mean, there's a sense like, oh, you get all British cast, and then you just have everybody in British English, and it's sort of like we get that European vibe, and that's fine. But I'd much rather just have nobody trying to get good actors, let them play good parts, and the film and the story and the narrative is involving enough to me that I really just that feeling of like, oh, they aren't speaking in the same way, it just drops away. And to me, it's much more like watching a sort of slightly surreal play of these events. So I really love that a lot, and I've already seen it again. And I mean, it for me personally, it's like a 4.5 to 5, and it's an easy 5-star recommendation, no question. I think everybody should go out and see it, and I'll make people watch it and all that. Other things next thing I watched last week was 13 Assassins, the Takeshi Miike movie, and this is pretty much, I think, of the Miike movies I've watched. I think this is the first that I have felt inclined to make sure I see again and to think about adding to my collection. I really love the classic 13 Assassins from 1963, directed by Ichi Kudo. Trying to think of if I've seen any of his other films. I've seen 11 Samurai, which is not bad. And I know that The Great Killing, like this supposedly sort of a trilogy of 13 Assassins, Great Killing, 11 Samurai, that are all just sort of these tragedies about samurai honor and knowingly going into death, into a situation where you're going to die. Um, I love his classic 13 Assassins. It's a great artistic movie, and the remake is a nice, like, it kind of, for me, it's a bit like sort of, Sorcerer and The Wages of Fear, or uh, even as a movie that I didn't really love. Oh man, Harakiri, the like old version and the new versions of Harakiri, where like I would recommend to people, anybody interested in Harakiri and like classic samurai films, watch the new one and then watch the old one first. And I would be totally satisfied telling people to do the same with 13 Assassins, where watching the new one in color with like its violence and action and uh great visual filmmaking and all that, like it'll give you, if that piques your interest, then that's a better gateway to watching a really interesting and artistically done classic movie, rather than telling people, oh yeah, go watch this old black and white movie that's a bit slow moving and is, I think, really cool and fascinating and has a great sense of drama to it, but it's not going to capture people the way that a movie like 13 Assassins will. uh, my only real quibbles with 13 Assassins at all were, there's a scene with this woman who's like, they really wanted to establish that this evil guy is really evil and, raping this guy's wife and then killing him in front of her wasn't enough to do that, I guess. So they wanted to really up the evil, and they had like, oh, here's this woman who he like cut off her arms and legs and then just toyed with her for a while and then cast her out into the street. And she's like writing with her mouth this like, was a total annihilation of her village where he killed all of her family and all that. And the main character, Shinrokuro Shimada, played by Takayuki Yamada. He's just like looks at her and he starts laughing, is sort of like overwhelmed with sort of the horror of the situation. And it's like, yeah, but I'm kind of laughing because this is way over the top, and it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous moment in the movie. It's like, yeah, okay, we get the guy's evil. You can't really support. There's nothing about this movie that supports this level of horror in the film. You don't really back that up. Even as like other awful things that he's done, like this is some Silence of the Lambs shit that you're really not buoying with your plot and your narrative and your characters and your acting. Otherwise, there's some like CGI with the village that they turn into a huge trap to kill this evil lord, and that's kind of weak and doesn't really is unnecessary. But beyond that, it's a super well paced, really fundamentally well done samurai action movie. Just a great take on a classic story, and I think it really speaks to the strength of 13 Assassins as a narrative, that you can make a classic version in the 60s and do a modern version of it now, and it holds up just as well, and it feels just as interesting and as powerful and as gripping as a film. So definitely like a 4-star movie for me, and a movie that I would recommend as a 4-star movie as well, that's just easily accessible and beautiful and lots of action and violence and very fun to watch. And the first Takeshi Miike movie that's really felt like it worked for me narratively, having just watched Blade of the Immortal, which feels more like his sort of typical slightly narratively broken, inconsistent, a lot more interest in visual storytelling than narrative arc. This is more of my classic, like very firm narrative progressions, very clear storytelling, very old-fashioned filmmaking, which I appreciate. After that, I watched the 1973 Sidney Lumet movie starring Sean Connery, The Offence. I'm a big fan of Lumet. Certainly, 12 Angry Men, really, or, Dog Day Afternoon as well, but really a huge fan of Network. Prince of the City is also really fun, and his version of Murder on the Orient Express and Serpico. Just a director who's got a very, very deep filmography to dive into. The Offence is interesting. It's not my favorite Lumet movie. It's a little too, I don't know, self-contained. And usually I like very self-contained, I like plays on film. I like things that have, and this is a play. It's a John Hopkins play that he wrote as a screenplay treatment. And usually I really like plays on film, and I do like that feeling of it. But I'll say this felt maybe even a little too self-contained, where it sort of closes where it opens, and the journey in between is interesting, but it's not that interesting. Sean Connery playing a detective, and I can spoil the intro because it's just what the whole movie is about from moment one. It's Sean Connery plays a British detective who beats a man to death in interrogation, and the movie's basically just about the fallout from that and about why he did it and how he got there. And it's Connery, I think some of the dialogue ends up being pretty stodgy for him. He's not always the best actor to carry a purely dramatic role, but for the physical scenes, he carries it really well. He's got a great sense of menace in the role. That's something Connery does really better than he's given credit for. I think he was obviously as James Bond a very physical actor in that role, but he's really good as like a menacing, angry actor. So I think that the role really suits him well for that. There's some nice cinematography and some interesting sort of dramatic storytelling notes, a lot of flashback and things like that that I think is actually done pretty well in the movie. And just a decent but depressing and, like I say, a little overly self-contained, a little overly simple uh, British police drama. I would probably I'd more readily recommend 1965's The Hill, also by Sidney Lumet, also starring Sean Connery. Um, I think that, while also depressing, is just a really brilliant war movie and a great, just sort of, you know, Connery is right in the middle of his James Bond run and gets to use that sort of like same sort of cheeky talk, very unwilling to take orders attitude and sort of loose cannon attitude that was so good in Bond, and carries that into a new avenue of a British soldier who's in a military barracks where their whole purpose is to take soldiers that have been reprimanded or have been effectively jailed, and to try and whip them back into shape and discipline them so that they can be put back into action. And it's just a fantastic, really good military drama. So I would highly recommend that over The Offence. But I would also, if you love Sidney Lumet movies, it's not a bad one. It's probably about, for me personally, it was about 3, but I'd recommend it more as like a 3.5, something that people are, it's not a hard movie to watch. Before that, I watched the 1951 rom-com or rom-dramedy, I'd say, People Will Talk, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz and starring Cary Grant and Gene Crane. And this was a really, really weird movie. I like Mankiewicz, I suppose it would be, actually, although, yeah, Mankiewicz, especially for his sort of, I really love his style of black and white filming. And, I love him for making Cleopatra and, but especially for The Train, his, I think, am I wrong? I thought that was him. Maybe I'm remembering something else. Anyway, I've seen it, No Way Out is great, and Guys and Dolls, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra. Who did The Train? Why am I getting that wrong? Burt Lancaster. Oh, that was John Frankenheimer. Okay. One of those other guys with the really long European name. Okay, never mind. Anyway, Mankiewicz, Guys and Dolls, All About Eve, Sleuth, No Way Out, and this was just weird. People Will Talk is it was based on a 1930s play by Kurt Goetz. It was a German play, and I'm not saying that I'm sure he wasn't necessarily any kind of, I'm not saying he was a Nazi or anything like that, because I definitely would not want to align anybody with that just off of watching a movie. But yeah, so he emigrated to the U.S. in 1939, and so he wasn't in Germany during the war. But there's definitely a sense that People Will Talk is very much an Ubermensch movie. Like it's all Cary Grant is very much this idealized figure of manhood that it comes across as this very like he's intelligent, he's compassionate, he's funny and strong, and he is passionate, and all these different things that sort of and they're all sort of parodied or not parodied, but they're shown in glimmers that he's surrounded by all these men who are these sort of like clearly inferior male specimens because they lack one of the any one of these things that he has. There's like the academic who is only concerned with science and research, the or the scientist rather is only concerned with research, or the academic who's only concerned with proper following orders and doing things, keeping everything in control. Or there's the father who lacks any real drive or willpower or motivation, or the uncle who is miserly and is only concerned with money, and all these things. And they're all just these pale shadows around Cary Grant, who's this doctor who he's got like this sort of very Patch Adams vibe of healing people with strength and humor and appealing to their better nature and all that. And this woman that he falls in love with, and it's just a weird story. It's a very non-traditional narrative for by 50s Hollywood standards. It definitely feels more like a 30s story where you just get this. There's not really so much of of narrative arcs as there are just interpersonal dynamics being played off of each other as the story goes along, and the narrative's taking different paths. Like the initial story is all about this woman being pregnant and wanting to commit suicide because she's afraid that her father won't be able to handle her getting pregnant out of wedlock for a number of reasons. So Cary Grant lies to her and tells her she's not pregnant so that she won't commit suicide, and then he falls in love with her and all that. But it's like, and then he falls in love with her, and then there's like a whole another set of narratives around that, and a whole bunch of whole narrative around him being a sham doctor in the past, and the current educated board that he's working with wanting to punish him for it and all that. And just an odd movie. I would give it probably a 2.5 personally, and really only recommend it if you're really into Cary Grant or Joseph Mankiewicz films. Not something that I would recommend really on its own merits at all. And then finally, watched The Furies by Anthony Mann from 1950. Mann is quietly one of my favorite, especially Westerns directors of the 40s and 50s. Things like Naked Spur and Winchester 73, or The Man from Laramie and The Man of the West. Not to mention his, he did a lot of really fun sort of B film noirs like Raw Deal and T-Men, or the weird period drama thriller Reign of Terror about Robespierre and the French Revolution. So a director I really am very fond of, and I had a lot of hopes for The Furies as another kind of classic Western right in his wheelhouse of the 1950s. But it stars Barbara Stanwyck, who I really like too. But I'll admit this movie just didn't grab me at all. I ended up turning it off halfway through. It's basically just a pure melodrama. It's a Western soap opera about life on a sprawling ranch, and this woman who is sort of a overwhelming personality and tomboy who doesn't want to get married or settle down, and her father who she dotes on and who decides that he's going to marry some woman that Barbara Stanwyck hates, and he's gonna you know, she's going to change life on the ranch for everybody, and that it's all just the interpersonal drama of these people in their lives together, and it just doesn't really capture me at all. Not what I was hoping for from a classic Anthony Mann Western. Even knowing that it was going to be something of a melodrama, I sort of thought that it would be more than that, more than a soap opera. And soap operas, at least especially this kind of soap opera, really just doesn't grab me at all. Probably something, like for me personally, it's a two and a half for enjoyment, but probably more like a three and a half if you're really into Barbara Stanwyck. If you like classic melodrama, it's not a bad movie. It's just not a terribly compelling one for me. Next week, I will be back with another five-ish movies. See, going to be talking about The Long Riders and The Hunger. Ah, damn it. Come on. Let's see. Yeah, The Long Riders and Devil in a Blue Dress and The Hunger and Meet John Doe and The Sucker. So that is my movie list for next week, or for this week coming. And I may try and also go and watch A Quiet Place, the new horror thriller that's out in theaters, which I've heard is really good and fun. So it's getting universally great reviews, and I'll try and see that this week too, hopefully. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Give me a thumbs up down below and subscribe to my YouTube channel, all that good stuff. And that helps a lot. As you know, you can find me on Twitter at the Zane Simon. Thanks everyone, and see you next time.